Commander Jacob Keyes stood on the bridge of the Iroquois. He leaned against the brass railings and surveyed the stars in the distance. He wished the circumstances of his first command were more auspicious, but experienced officers were in short supply these days, and he had his orders. He walked around the circular bridge, examining the monitors and displays of engine status. He paused at the screens showing the stars fore and aft. He couldn't quite get used to the view of deep space again. The stars were so vivid, and here so different from the stars near Earth. The Iroquois had rolled out of space dock at Reach, one of the UNSC's primary naval yards, just 3 months ago. They hadn't even installed her with an AI yet. Like good officers, the elaborate artificial intelligence systems were also in dangerously short supply. Still, the Iroquois was fast, well armoured, and armed to the teeth. He couldn't have asked for a finer vessel. Unlike the frigates that Commander Keyes had toured on before, the Meriwether Lewis and the Midsummer Night, this ship was a destroyer. She was almost as heavy as both of those vessels combined, but she was only 7 meters longer. Some in the fleet thought the massive ships were unwieldy in combat, too slow and cumbersome. What those critics forgot was that a UNSC destroyer sported 2 MAC guns, 26 oversized Archer missile pods, and 3 nuclear warheads. Unlike other fleet ships, she carried no single-ship fighters. Instead, her extra mass came from the nearly 2 meters of titanium A battleplate armor that covered her from stem to stern. The Iroquois could dish out and take a tremendous amount of punishment. Someone at the shipyard had appreciated the Iroquois for what she was. 2 long streaks of crimson war paint had been applied to her port and starboard flanks. Strictly non-regulation, and it would have to go, but secretly, Commander Keyes liked the ornamentation. He sat in the commander's chair and watched his junior officers at their stations. Incoming transmissions, Lieutenant Dominique reported. Status reports from Sigma Octanus 4 and the Archimedes sensor outpost. Pipe them through to my monitor, Commander Keyes said. Dominique had been one of his students at the academy. He had transferred to Luna from the University Astrophysique in Paris after his sister was killed in action. He was short, nimbly athletic, and he rarely cracked a smile. He was always business, and Keyes appreciated that. Commander Keyes was less impressed, however, with the rest of his bridge officers. Lieutenant Hickower manned the weapons console. Her long fingers and slender arms slowly checked the status of the ordnance with all the deliberation of a sleepwalker. Her dark hair was always falling into her eyes. Oddly, her record showed that she had survived several battles with the Covenant, so perhaps her lack of enthusiasm was merely battle fatigue. Lieutenant Hall stood post at ops. She seemed competent enough. Her uniform was always freshly pressed. Her blonde hair trimmed exactly at the regulation 16 centimeters. She had authored 7 physics papers on slip-space communications. The only problem was that she was always smiling and trying to impress him, occasionally by showing up her fellow officers. Keyes disapproved of such displays of ambition. Manning navigation, however, was his most problematic officer, Lieutenant Jaeger. It may have been that navigation was the commander's strong suit, so anyone else in that position never seemed up to par. On the other hand, Lieutenant Jagger was moody, and when Keyes had come aboard, the man's small hazel eyes seemed glazed. He could have sworn he had caught the man on duty with liquor on his breath. He had ordered a blood test. The results were negative. "Orders, sir?" Jaeger asked. "Continue on this heading, Lieutenant. We'll finish our patrol around Sigma Octanus and then accelerate and enter slipspace." Commander Keyes eased into his seat and detached the tiny monitor from the armrest. He read the hourly report from the Archimedes sensor post. The log of the large mass was curious. It was too big to be even the largest Covenant carrier, yet something was oddly familiar about its shape. He retrieved his pipe from his jacket, lit it, and inhaled a puff, and then exhaled the fragrant smoke through his nose. Keyes would never even have thought about smoking on the other vessels he had served on, but here, command had its privileges. He pulled up his files transferred from the academy, several theoretical papers that had recently caught his interest. One he thought might apply to the outpost's unusual reading. That paper had initially sparked his interest because of its author. He had never forgotten his first assignment with Dr. Catherine Halsey, nor the names of any children they had observed. He opened the file and read, United Nations Space Command, Astrophysics Journal 034-23-01. Abstract. The space-bending properties of mass in normal space are well described by Einstein's general relativity. Such distortions, however, are complicated by the anomalous quantum gravitational effects in SF spaces. Using loop string analysis, it can be shown that a large mass bends space in SF space more than general relativity predicts by an order of magnitude. This bending may explain how several small objects clustered together in SF space have been reported erroneously as a single large mass. Commander Keyes switched back to the silhouette from the Archimedes report. The leading edge almost looked like the bulbous head of a whale. That realization chilled him to the core. He quickly opened the UNSC database of all known Covenant ships. He scanned them until he found the three-dimensional representation of one of their medium-sized warships. He rotated it into a three-quarter profile. He overlaid the image on the silhouette, scaled it back a little. It was a perfect match. Lieutenant Dominique, get FleetCom ASAP, Priority Alpha. The lieutenant snapped straight into his chair. Yes, sir. The bridge officers looked at the commander and then exchanged glances with one another. Commander Keyes brought up a map of the system on his datapad. The silhouette monitored by the outpost was on a direct course for Sigma Octanus 4. That confirmed his theory. Bring us about to course 047, Lieutenant Jaeger. Lieutenant Hall pushed the reactors to 110%. Aye, Commander, Lieutenant Jaeger replied. Reactor running hot, sir, Hall reported, now exceeding recommended operational parameters. ETA? Jaeger calculated, and then looked up. 43 minutes, he replied. Too slow, Commander Keyes muttered. Reactor to 130%, Lieutenant Hall. She hesitated. Sir? Do it. Yes, sir. She moved as if someone had electrically shocked her. FleetCom online, sir, Lieutenant Dominique said. The weathered face of Admiral Michael Stanforth appeared on the main view screen. Commander Keyes breathed a sigh of relief. Admiral Stanforth had a reputation for being reasonable and intelligent. He'd understand the logic of the situation. Commander Keyes, the Admiral said. The old schoolmaster himself, huh? This is the priority channel, son. This better be an emergency. Commander Keyes ignored the obvious condescension. He knew many at FleetCom thought he deserved to command nothing more than a classroom, and some probably thought he didn't deserve that. The Sigma Octanus system is about to come under attack, sir. Admiral Stanforth cocked an eyebrow and leaned closer to the screen. I'm requesting that all ships in system rendezvous with the Iroquois at Sigma Octanus 4, and any ships in neighbouring systems make best speed here. Show me what you've got, Keyes, the Admiral said. Commander Keyes displayed the silhouette from the sensor outpost first. Covenant ships, sir. The silhouettes are overlapped. Our probes resolve them as one mass because slip space is bent by gravity more easily than normal space. The Admiral listened to his analysis, frowning. You fought the Covenant, sir. You know how precisely they can maneuver their ships through the slipstream. I've seen a dozen alien craft appear in normal space, in perfect formation, not a kilometre apart. Yeah, the Admiral muttered. I've seen that too. Alright, Keyes, good work. You'll get everything we can send. Thank you, sir. You just hang in there, son. Good luck. FleetCom out. The view screen snapped off. Sir, Lieutenant Hall turned around. How many Covenant ships? I'd estimate 4 medium-tonnage vessels, he said. The equivalent of our frigates. 4 Covenant ships, Lieutenant Jaeger muttered. What can we do? Do, Commander Keyes said. Our duty. Begging the commander's pardon, sir. But there are 4. Jaggers began to protest. Keyes cut him off with a glare. Stow that, mister. He paused, weighing his words. Sigma Octanus 4 has 17 million citizens, Lieutenant. Are you suggesting that we just stand by and watch the Covenant glass the planet? No, sir. His gaze dropped to the deck. We will do the best we can, Commander Keyes said. In the meantime, remove all weapon system locks, order missile crews to readiness and warm up the MAC guns, and remove the safeties from one of our nukes. Yes, sir, Lieutenant Hikawa said. An alarm sounded at Ops. Reactor hysteresis approaching failure levels, Lieutenant Hall reported. Superconducting magnets overloading. Coolant breakdown imminent. Vent primary coolant and pump in the reserve tanks, Commander Keyes ordered. That'll buy us another 5 minutes. Yes, sir. Commander Keyes fumbled with his pipe. He didn't bother to light the thing, just chewed on the end. And then he put it away. The nervous habit wasn't setting the right example for his bridge officers. He didn't have the luxury of showing his apprehension. The truth was, he was terrified. 4 Covenant ships would be an even match for 7 destroyers. The best he could hope for was to get their attention and outrun them. Hopefully distract them until the fleet got here. Of course, those Covenant ships could outrun the Iroquois as well. Lieutenant Jaeger, he said, initiate the Cole protocol. Purge our navigation databases and then generate an appropriate randomized exit vector from the Sigma Octanus system. Yes, sir. He fumbled with his controls. He hung his head, steadied his hands, and slowly typed in the commands. Lieutenant Hall, make preparations to override reactor safeties. His junior officers all paused for a second. Aye, sir, Lieutenant Hall whispered. "We're receiving a transmission from the system's edge," Lieutenant Dominique announced. "The frigates Alliance and Gettysburg are on an inbound vector at maximum speed. ETA? 1 hour. Good, Commander Keyes said. That hour might as well be a month. This battle would be over in minutes. He could not fight the enemy, he was severely outgunned, and he couldn't outrun them either. There had to be another option. Hadn't he always told his students that when you were out of options, then you were using the wrong tactics? You had to bend the rules, shift the perspective, anything to find a way out of a hopeless situation. The black space near Sigma Octanus 4 boiled and frothed with motes of green light. "Ships entering normal space," Lieutenant Yeager announced, panic tinging in his voice. Keyes got to his feet. He had been wrong. There weren't 4 Covenant frigates. A pair of enemy frigates emerged from slit space, escorting a destroyer and a carrier. His blood ran cold. He had seen battles in which a Covenant destroyer had made Swiss cheese of UNSC ships. Its plasma torpedoes could boil through the Erika's 2 meters of titanium-made battle plate in seconds. Their weapons were light years ahead of the UNSC's. Their weapons, Commander Keyes muttered under his breath. He did have a third option. "Continue at emergency speed," he ordered, "and come about to heading 230. Lieutenant Yeager swiveled in his seat. "That will put us on a collision course with their destroyer, sir." "I know," Commander Keyes replied. "In fact, I'm counting on doing just that." Commander Keyes stood with his hands behind his back and tried to look calm. Not an easy thing to do when his ship was on a collision course with a Covenant battle group. Inside, adrenaline raced through his blood and his pulse pounded. He had to at least appear in control for his crew. He was asking a lot from them. Probably everything, in fact. His junior officers watched their status monitors. They occasionally glanced nervously at him, but their gazes always drift back to the center view screen. The Covenant ships looked like toys in the distance. It was dangerous to think of them as harmless, however. One slip, one underestimation of their tremendous firepower, and the Iroquois would be destroyed. The alien carrier had 3 bulbous sections. Its swollen center had 13 launch bays. Commander Keyes had seen hundreds of fighters stream out of them before. Fast, accurate, and deadly craft. Normally his ship's AI would handle point defense. Only this time, there was no AI installed. The alien destroyer was a third again as massive as the Iroquois. She bristled with pulse laser turrets and insect-like antennae. The carrier and the destroyer moved together, but not towards the Iroquois. They slowly drifted in system towards Sigma Octanus 4. Were they going to ignore him? Blast the planet without even bothering to swap him out of the way first? The Covenant frigates, however, lagged behind. They turned in unison, and their sides faced the Iroquois, preparing for a broadside. Motes of red light appeared and swarmed around the frigate's lateral lines, building into a solid stripe of hellish illumination. "Detecting high levels of beta particle radiation," Lieutenant Dominique said. "They're getting ready to fire their plasma weapons, Commander." "Course correction, sir?" Lieutenant Yeager asked. His fingers tapped in a new heading, "Bound out system. Stay on course." It took all of Commander Keyes' concentration to say that matter-of-factly. Lieutenant Yeager turned to speak, but Commander Keyes didn't have time to address his concerns. "Lieutenant Hikawa," Commander Keyes said, "armor Shiva missile, remove all nuclear safety locks." "Shiva armed, aye, Commander." Lieutenant Hikawa's face was a mask of grim determination. "Set the fuse on radio transmission code sequence detonation only. Disable proximity fuse. Stand by for a launch pilot program." "Sir?" The lieutenant looked confused by his order, but then said, "Sir, yes sir, making it happen." The alien frigates in the center of the view screen no longer looked remotely like toys to Commander Keyes. They looked real and larger every second. The red glow along their sides had become solid bands, almost too bright to look at directly. Commander Keyes picked up his datapad and quickly tapped in calculations: velocity, mass, and heading. He wished they had an AI to double-check his figures. This amounted to no more than an educated guess. How long would it take the Iroquois to orbit Sigma Octanus 4? He got a number and cut it by 60%, knowing they'd either pick up speed or be dead by the time it mattered. Lieutenant Hikawa set the Shiva's course for Mark 180, full burn 12 seconds. "Aye sir," she tapped in the parameters and locked them into the system. "Missile ready, sir." "Sir," Lieutenant Yeager swiveled round and stood. His lips were drawn into a tight thin line. "That course fires the missile directly away from our enemies." I am aware of that, Lieutenant Jaeger. Sit down and await further orders. Lieutenant Jaeger sat. He rubbed his temple with a trembling hand, his other balled into a fist. Commander Keyes linked into the nav system and set a countdown timer on his datapad. 29 seconds. On my mark, Lieutenant Hikawa, launch that nuke. And not a moment before. Aye, sir. A slender hand hovered over the control panel. Mac guns are still hot, Commander, she reminded him. Divert the energy keeping the capacitors at full charge and route them into the engines, Commander Keyes ordered. Lieutenant Hall said, diverting now, sir. She exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Hikawa. Engines now operating at 150% of rated output. Red line in 2 minutes. Contact, contact. Lieutenant Dominique shouted. Enemy plasma torpedoes away, sir. Scarlet lightning erupted from the alien frigates. Twin bolts of fire streaked through the darkness. They looked as if they could burn space itself. The torpedoes were on a direct course for the Iroquois. Course correction, sir. Lieutenant Jaeger's voice broke with strain. His uniform was soaked with perspiration. Negative, Commander Keyes replied. Continue on this heading. Arm all aft Archer missile pods. Rotate launch arcs to 180 degrees. Aye, sir, Lieutenant Hikawa wrinkled her brow. And then she slowly nodded. Boiling red plasma filled half the forward view screen. It was beautiful to watch in an odd way, like a front row seat at a forest fire. Keyes found himself strangely calm. This would either work, or it would not. The odds were long, but he was confident that his actions were the only option to survive this encounter. Lieutenant Dominique turned. Collision with the plasma in 19 seconds, sir. Jaeger turned from his station. Sir, this is suicide. Our armor cannot withstand. Keyes cut him off. Mister, man your station or I will have you removed from the bridge. Jaeger looked pleadingly at Hikawa. We're all going to die. She refused to meet his gaze and turned back to her controls. You heard the commander, she said quietly. Man your post. Jaeger sank into his seat. Collision with the plasma in 7 seconds, Lieutenant Hall said. She bit her lower lip. Lieutenant Jaeger, transfer emergency thruster controls to my station. The emergency thrusters were tanks of trihydride, tetrazine and hydrazine peroxide. When they mixed, they did so with explosive force, literally blasting the Iroquois onto a new course. The ship had 6 such tanks, strategically placed on hardened points on the hull. Commander Keyes consulted the countdown timer on his datapad. Lieutenant Hikawa, fire the nuke. Shiva away, sir. On course. 180 maximum burn. Plasma filled the forescreen. The center of the red mass turned blue. Greens and yellows radiated outward, the light frequencies blue shifting in spectra. Distance 300,000 kilometers, Dominique said. Collision in 2 seconds. Commander Keyes waited a heartbeat and then hit the emergency thrusters to port. A bang resonated through the ship's hull. Commander Keyes flew sideways and impacted with the bulkhead. The view screen was full of fire and the bridge was suddenly hot. Commander Keyes stood. He counted the beats of his pounding heart. 1, 2, 3. If they had been hit by the plasma, there wouldn't be anything to count. They would be dead already. Only one view screen was working now, however. Aft camera. The twin blots of fire had streaked along their trajectories for a moment, then lazily arced, continuing their pursuit of the Iroquois. One pulled slightly ahead of its counterpart, though they now appeared like 2 blazing eyes. Commander Keyes marveled at the alien's ability to direct the plasma from such a great distance. Good, he murmured. Chase us all the way to hell, you bastards. Track them, he ordered Lieutenant Hall. Aye, sir. Her perfectly groomed hair was tousled. Plasma increasing velocity, matching our speed. Overtaking our velocity now. They will intercept in 43 seconds. Forward camera, Commander Keyes ordered. The view screen flashed. The image changed to show the 2 alien frigates turning to face the incoming Iroquois head-on. Blue lights flickered along their hulls, pulse lasers charging. Commander Keyes pulled back the camera angle and saw the alien carrier and destroyer were still inbound towards Sigma Octanus 4. He read their position off his datapad and quickly performed the necessary calculations. Course correction, he told Lieutenant Jaeger. Come about to heading 004.25, declination 000.18. Aye, sir, Jaeger said. 004.25, declination 000.18. The view screen turned and centered on the enormous Covenant destroyer. Collision course, Lieutenant Hall announced. Impact with Covenant destroyer in 8 seconds. Stand by for new course. Declination minus 000.10. Aye, sir. As Jaeger typed, he wiped the sweat from his eyes and double-checked his numbers. Course online. Awaiting your orders, sir. Collision with the Covenant destroyer in 5 seconds, Hall said, and she clutched at the edge of her seat. The destroyer grew in the view screen, laser turrets and launch bays, bulbous alien protrusions and flickering blue lights. Hold this course, Commander Keyes said. Sound collision alarm. Switch to undercarriage camera now. Klaxons blared. The view screen snapped off and on and showed black space, then a flash of the faint purple-blue hull of a Covenant ship. The Iroquois screeched and shuddered as she grazed the prow of the Covenant cruiser. Silver shields flickered on screen, and then the screen filled with static. Course correction now, Commander Keyes shouted. Aye, sir. There was a brief burn from the thrusters, and the Iroquois nudged down slightly. Hull breach, Lieutenant Hull said. Sealing pressure doors. Aft camera, Commander Keyes said. Guns, fire aft Archer missile pods. Missiles away, Lieutenant Hickower replied. Keyes watched as the first of the plasma torpedoes that had been trailing the Iroquois impacted on the prow of the alien destroyer. The ship's shields flared and flickered, then vanished. The second bolt hit a moment later. The hull of the alien ship blazed and then turned red hot, melted and boiled. Secondary explosions burst throughout the hull. The Archer missiles streaked towards the wounded Covenant ship, tiny trails of exhaust stretching towards their target. They slammed into the gaping wounds and detonated. Fire and debris burst from the destroyer. A smile spread across Keyes' face as he watched the alien ship burn, list, and slowly plunge into the Sigma Octanus 4 gravity well. Without power, the Covenant vessel would burn up in the planet's atmosphere. Commander Keyes flicked on the intercom. Brace for emergency thruster maneuver. He punched the thruster controls. Explosive force detonated on the starboard side of the ship, and the ship nosed towards Sigma Octanus 4. Course correction, Lieutenant Jaeger. Bring us into a tight orbit. Aye, sir. He furiously tapped in commands, diverting engine output through altitude thrusters. The hull of the Iroquois glowed red as it entered the atmosphere. A cloud of yellow ionization built up around the view screen. Commander Keyes gripped the railing tighter. The view screen cleared and he could see the stars, the ship entering the dark side of the planet. Commander Keyes slumped forward and started breathing again. Engine coolant failure, sir, Lieutenant Hall said. Shut the engines down, he ordered. Emergency vent. Aye, sir, venting fusion reactor plasma. The ship was quiet. No rumble of her engines, and no one said anything, until Lieutenant Hickower stood and said, Sir, that was the most brilliant maneuver I have ever seen. Commander Keyes gave a short laugh. You think so, Lieutenant? If one of his students had proposed such a maneuver in his tactics class, he would have given them a C+. He would have told them their maneuver was full of bravado and daring, but extremely risky, placing the crew in the ship in unnecessary danger. This isn't over yet. Stay sharp, he told them. Lieutenant Hickower, what is the charge status of the MAC guns? Capacitors at 95%, sir, and draining at a rate of 3% per minute. Ready the MAC guns. 1 heavy round apiece. Arm all forward Archer missile pods. Aye, sir. The Iroquois broke free of the dark side of Sigma Octanus 4. Fire chemical thrusters to break orbit, Lieutenant Hall. Firing, aye. There was a brief rumble. The screen centered on the backsides of the 2 Covenant frigates they had passed on the way in. The alien ships started to come about. Blue flashes flickered along their hulls as the laser turrets charged. Motes of red collected along their lateral lines. They were readying another salvo of plasma torpedoes. There was something there, however. It was too small to see on the view screen. The nuke. Keyes had launched that missile in the opposite direction, but its reverse thrust had not completely overcome their tremendous forward velocity. As the Iroquois had screamed over the prow of the destroyer, and as they orbited Sigma Octanus 4, the nuke had drifted closer to the frigates, who had fixed their attention solidly on the Iroquois. Commander Keyes tapped his datapad and sent the signal to detonate the bomb. There was a flash of white and a crackle of lightning, and the alien ships vanished as a cloud of destruction enveloped them. Waves of EMP interacted with the magnetic field of Sigma Octanus 4 and rippled with a rainbow borealis. The cloud of vapor expanded and cooled and faded to yellow, orange, red, and then black dust that scattered into space. Both Covenant frigates, however, were still intact. Their shields, however, flickered once, and then went dead. Get me firing solutions for the MAC gun, Lieutenant, on the double. Aye, sir. MAC gun capacitors at 93%. Firing solution online. Fire, Lieutenant Hikawa. 2 thumps resonated through the hull of the Iroquois. Lock remaining Archer missile pods on target and fire. Missiles away, Commander. Twin thunderbolts and hundreds of missiles streaked towards the 2 helpless frigates. The Mac rounds tore through them. One ship was holed from nose to tail. The other ship was hit on her midline, right near the engines. Internal explosions chained up the length of the ship, bulging the second ship's hull along her length. Archer missiles impacted seconds later, exploding through the clanks of hull and armour, tearing the alien ships apart. The frigate that had taken the Mac round in her engines mushroomed, a firework bouquet of shrapnel and sparks. The other ship burned, her internal skeletal structure showing now. She turned towards the Iroquois, but didn't fire a weapon, just drifted out of control, dead in space. Position of the Covenant carrier, Lieutenant Hall. Lieutenant Hall paused, and then reported, in polar orbit around Sigma Octanus 4, but she's moving off at considerable speed. Headed out of system, course 045. Alert the Allegiance and the Gettysburg of her location. Commander Keyes sighed and slumped back into his chair. They had stopped the Covenant ships from glassing the planet, saved millions of lives. They had done the impossible, taken on 4 Covenant ships and won. Commander Keyes paused in his self-congratulation. Something was wrong. He had never seen the Covenant run. In every battle he had ever seen or read about, they stayed to slaughter every last survivor, or if they were defeated, they always fought to the last ship. Check the planet, he told Lieutenant Hall. Look for anything. Dropped weapons, strange transmissions? There's got to be something there. Aye, sir. Keyes prayed she wouldn't find anything. At this point he was out of tricks. He couldn't turn the Iroquois around to return to Cygnus 4 even if he had wanted to. The engines were going to be down for a long time. They were speeding on an out-of-system vector at considerable velocity. And even if they could stop, there was no way to recharge the Mac guns, and no remaining Archer missiles. They were practically dead in space. He pulled out his pipe and steadied his shaking hand. Sir, Lieutenant Hall cried. Dropships, sir. The alien carrier deployed 34 dropships. I have silhouettes descending onto the surface. They're on a course for Côte d'Azur, a major population center. An invasion? Commander Keyes said. Get FleetCom ASAP. Time to send in the Marines. Thanks for watching, folks. This was from the book Fall of Reach by Eric Nylund. If you want me to do more content like this, please let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear another story, please click the video on screen now.